What's good guys, my name is Oleg Nikitin, you're watching No Limits On channel from Russia with love. So today we're comparing two 12 megapixel cameras, Sony a7s III and iPhone 13 Pro Max, and we'll do it in RAW. Edited of course. A few days ago I put out a comparison in terms of stills with Nikon D780 and iPhone 13 Pro Max, which is now the most viewed video on my channel, already 250,000 views, but I got a ton of comments that I had to compare only in RAW, and also that the Nikon D780 is not the newest camera and it's not ideal for such comparison. And also that I can't compare 24 megapixel and 12 megapixel cameras, and I had to compare the iPhone 13 Pro Max with mirrorless cameras and fast lenses. So I've gathered all of your comments and I understand you guys, and that is why I've made more than 120 photos for this comparison, and I know that Sony is much pricier than the iPhone 13 Pro Max, but this review and comparison is only because of the interest I have and to let you know how far the computational photography brings the small sensors of the iPhone. I'm not saying that you have to sell your mirrorless camera and buy an iPhone, nothing of that, just a comparison because it's interesting. Also, I have uploaded to a cloud the RAW files from both Sony and iPhone so you can download those and make your own comparison. I'll leave a link down below. And now, let's go. So guys, you've watched a couple of shots while I was talking, and now let's have a look at different shots more precisely. We'll start off with the main camera sensor of the iPhone 26mm or 1x, and when we look at the pictures without cropping, it looks pretty similar to my eye. And when we crop in, we can see that Apple ProRAW still contains a lot of artificial sharpening, and I don't really like it. I could have made the Sony picture more sharp and add some clarity, but I do prefer this a touch softer look. I also could have softened the image from the iPhone, but I would prefer not having this extra digital sharpness in the iPhone pictures straight away. By the way, I tried to match the colors of both cameras. The Sony provides us with a touch more magenta picture and the iPhone with a little bit more towards cyan and green colors, especially with the leaves, so I had to tweak a little bit the hue. And one more shot with 26mm, we can clearly see that the sharpness is better on the iPhone, but we could have made the Sony picture sharper and it would look the same, I guess. But look at the noise in the iPhone's picture. I definitely see some noise, whereas the Sony is just clean. And now we're comparing the 85mm on the Sony and 77mm or x3 telephoto lens on the iPhone. And they're very comparable, guys. Just a touch more noise on the iPhone, but it's a great performance of this tiny little sensor. One more shot with the telephoto lenses. The iPhone 13 Pro Max telephoto lens is almost parfocal, so everything is in focus, whereas the branch at the top left corner of the Sony is kind of blurred out a little bit. But when we crop in terms of detail and sharpness, it's pretty comparable. I don't see a big difference. The Sony is a touch sharper, but it's negligible. Let's move on to ultra-wide lenses, and I've made this pretty vibrant landscape picture, and I can say that they look pretty similar. And when we crop in, we can see that the Sony is a touch more detailed, but it's just a few percent. I really enjoyed this shot of the tree, and I gained more information and dynamic range from Sony where the leaves are at the left of the tree. Those landscape shots are not that different, but we do have some flaws of both lenses. You can see that the Tamron lens is providing us with a flare and lack of contrast right here, and the iPhone's lens is giving us a little dot, it's a flare right here. Nothing too serious, but I just have to mention. On this shot I do prefer the color of the Sony, where the buildings are, especially the orange part of the building. It's more true to life as my eyes saw this, but maybe I'm not that experienced Lightroom user. On this shot we can see the dynamic range difference. I can say that I do prefer the picture on the Sony side, but once again they're pretty close. But later on we'll start to see more difference between those cameras. And on this shot we see dramatic difference in terms of sharpness and especially the trees. They are just a noise reduction mess on the iPhone. And now some backlit shots. I can definitely say that both cameras are doing a great job in terms of backlit shots. We can gain a lot of information from the shadows and restore that information. And it's pretty cool that you have this capable phone always with you, and if you shoot in RAW, you definitely can achieve some great results. And here is a close-up shot. Look at the shallow depth of field of the iPhone, the main camera. It's definitely not that shallow as f3.5 on the Tamron, but still we do get a decent amount of blur, which is cool. And on this shot with the trunk, we also see the blur on the left side of the tree, and it's pretty decent as well. And on this shot with the leaf, we can see that Tamron is just destroying the iPhone with the ultra-wide lens, but when we get to the main camera, we can get some out of focus areas, and it's pretty cool that we can achieve this with the iPhone if we focus closely. And here we have f1.8 85mm picture, and now it's f9, and it's much closer to the iPhone's telephoto camera, as you can see right here, and it wasn't a portrait mode or something. That's the natural blur of 3x camera without macro mode. And kind of the same thing, f1.8 versus f4.5, so you got the idea. And now let's get to the portrait shots. Let's start off with the ultra-wide lens. Without cropping in, we can see that those pictures are looking pretty decent, I guess. But when we do crop 400%, we can see that the iPhone skin is looking a touch plasticky. And I do prefer the skin tone and overall skin feeling from the Sony. Here is the main camera shot, and we see ugly flare on the iPhone at the bottom right corner, and pretty ugly flare as well near the hand of Katyusha right there. And also we can see some out of focus areas behind her with the Tamron and Sony, and almost everything in focus with the iPhone. When we crop in, we can see this difference in blur and in sharpness. And now let's have a look at 85mm at f1.8 Zeiss bodies, and look at this bokeh. It's really beautiful. And if we look at the telephoto cameras without portrait mode, it's pretty flat and not blurry with the background at all. We can turn on the portrait mode, but we'll have some weird halos around her hair, and I don't really like how the portrait mode works with the edges of a person and especially hair. And also the portrait mode is only in JPEGs, so you can't combine Apple ProRAW and portrait mode as well. Or you can artificially blur the background in Photoshop like on this picture. It's not pretty, but it's something. So you can combine ProRAW and Photoshop and get similar results to this one. Without portrait mode on this shot, it's a pretty flat picture, and with the portrait shot, it's looking pretty decent, but it has some flaws, especially near her hair and also her left arm. And one more shot with the 85mm. Now we have the f3.5 bokeh mode on the portrait mode, and now let's switch to artificial blur at f1.8, and it's looking pretty cool if we look at the bokehs themselves, but the separation is still not the best. And now I'm using the 35mm f1.8 lens versus main camera on the iPhone, and as you can see, when we use the maximum blur of the iPhone, we do get a pretty nice picture in terms of bokehs, but still the separation is kind of weak and not good. And here is the portrait mode with 3x and 1x camera, a big crop, and it's the maximum amount of blur. And now let's compare Sony with 85mm, a proper big lens, and the portrait mode of the iPhone. That's a pretty cropped in picture, and you can see that the sharpness of the Sony is much better. The ultra wide lens, I could have made them closer in terms of color, but I do like both of those pictures. And here is a wide shot with the telephoto camera. As you can see, it's so flat with the iPhone, and it pops a ton more with the Sony and 85mm lens. And in this case, we couldn't use the portrait mode because it wouldn't work properly. And now the full height portrait with the 85mm and telephoto camera of the iPhone is pretty flat without portrait mode, and with portrait mode it looks decent, but not perfect. And with 35mm on the Sony and the main camera on the iPhone, in portrait mode, it's looking pretty good to my eye, but not perfect still. And let's get to the night shots. Once again, please read the settings. I can say that the portrait mode during nighttime is very poor with the iPhone. It's making her look older because it's kind of adding the clarity effect. It's getting not real, kind of plasticky skin tone. And I do prefer the Sony a ton. So I wouldn't recommend using any camera but the main camera sensor for taking pictures of people with the iPhone 13 Pro Max, and especially do not use the portrait mode. And then I put both cameras onto my big and heavy and sturdy tripod and started making the long exposure shots on both cameras. Unfortunately, from time to time, my phone didn't allow me to get longer exposures like 10 seconds or 15 or 30 seconds, so the night mode in the main camera app is kinda limited. And to shoot in RAW in a different app, you have to pay a ton of cash for it. So maybe this isn't the 100% fair comparison in this term. On the ultra-wide shot, we can see that both pictures are looking great, and when we zoom in, we can see a touch more noise on the iPhone's picture, but it's not that bad in my opinion. Also, the Sony looks a touch sharper. With the main camera sensor, we do get similar results. It's pretty good on both phones. Of course, iPhone is a touch noisier, but it's pretty okay and usable picture. And with the telephoto lens, we got 20 seconds of exposure on the iPhone, and we got even sharper results, but a touch noisier as well, than the Sony. Great job, both cameras. And now the longest exposure shots, from 10 to 30 seconds of exposure, and this forest is very dark. I almost didn't see anything. And all in all, I have to say that both cameras are doing great. The iPhone is a little bit contrastier, which is okay, and I'm pretty satisfied with both results. And now let's have a look at Sony's ISO 12800. It's looking pretty decent and kinda grainy and filmic looking grain, I would say. And now let's have a look at higher ISO values of the Sony. Now it's 51,200 ISO, 104,000 ISO, and enormous 400,000 ISO. And here is the night mode shot versus non-night mode shot on the iPhone. Pretty substantial difference. So guys, let's conclude. No, I will not conclude in this video, because you will make your own decision and your own conclusion, and you will write it down in your comment section below. I already told you my opinions on each photo, and I showed you everything and even uploaded the raw files so you could play around with those. So guys, if you did enjoy this video, please smash the like and subscribe buttons as I say in my videos, and hit the notifications bell. Also, you can check out my Instagram, and here is a couple of videos for you to watch next. My name is Oleg Nikitin from Russia with Love, and I see you guys in the next video. Take care, warmest hugs from Russia. Bye.